Hey, ambitious dentist, welcome to Start Your Dental Practice, the show for existing and aspiring dentists to take your dental practice to the highest possible level. I'm your host, Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV, founder of DentistMetrics.com. In every episode, we aim to demystify the how to start a dental practice problem by bringing on world-class dentists, influencers, and consultants in the dental industry to pick their brain about how to get past the barriers involved from going from no practice to being a practice owner to owning your own successful dental practice. Cash is like oxygen. In order to run a successful practice, not only do you have to provide exceptional service to your patients, you also have to master the art of collecting the money. So, here at Dentist Metrics, we talk a lot about marketing, branding, getting the most from your staff. But at the end of the day, collecting on the accounts receivable is going to help keep your doors open. Unfortunately, collecting from the patient isn't always easy. Patients end up in financial distress. They get countless insurance calls. Maybe your new front desk hire has made some mistakes, or they haven't done a good job communicating. And as we say, running a practice is just hard. But time and again, we see that the most successful practice owners have their ducks in a row. They know how to collect their money, which is why I'm really excited to share my conversation with today's guest, Andy Cleveland. So Andy is a self-proclaimed AR ninja. He's an accounts receivable consultant who's helped hundreds of practices master the art of collecting money. And, I have some clients of my own that have used Andy and have been very happy with his services, so I can give you a very specific referral to him. And in our conversation, he shares a ton of tips and tactics on how to make sure you're getting paid while staying professional. So here are just a few of the things you're going to learn. How to collect overdue payments without burning bridges with your patients. Why filing insurance properly is so important to your business. 3 very common accounts receivable errors that most practices make, as well as how to avoid them. And why outsourcing your insurance just might make sense for you, as well as the power of specialization in your business and life. So at the end of the episode, you'll also find out how you can get Andy's free patient checkout script to increase conversions. You definitely don't want to miss out on that. So be sure to listen all the way through this entire interview to get access to that. And now, here's my interview with Andy Cleveland. Hello, ambitious dentist. Today I have with us the accounts receivable ninja himself, Andy Cleveland. So Andy has been in the revenue cycle space for almost 20 years, pretty long time. And he served in a variety of different capacities. He started working with dental practices on the collections floor, motivating difficult patients to pay on everything from hygiene visits to full mouth restorations. So learning the business from the ground up, he really developed a proficiency in recovering lost revenues and rose to the top of his field. He realized his skill sets were better utilized working with practice owners, so he moved to the service side of the business. Currently, he consults with dental practices around the country and is responsible for training and coaching dental practice staff. He's partnered with numerous best-in-class service providers to help dentists optimize AR, which, to be honest, guys, that's a huge issue in a lot of practices. And so not only is it rewarding for him to help practices achieve greater efficiency, but improving key areas such as employee satisfaction and recare as well. He's a member of the ADMC, the Academy of Dental Management Consultants, as well as a creator of the Dental Resource Partners and Practice Support Network dental groups. He's also a speaker and consultant that enjoys specializing in the dental field. And Andy, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks, Jonathan, for having me. It's great to be here. I've listened to you so many times. It's great that I'm actually on your show.
That's fantastic. So tell me about how you actually, I read your little bio there. How did you get into the dental field specifically? Like, what was the day that you said, okay, dentists are a cool bunch of guys. I'm gonna go hang out with them for a while.
Yeah, it's probably just like most other things that we find similar to your story. I think you just kind of fall into it. So it just started really just getting involved, and I had a wide array of clients. But I've just found that the dental population is grossly underserved. They're often grouped in with every other standard business. So, restaurants and service industries as far as their servicing. And so it really just made sense for me to specialize. And the feedback I've gotten is overwhelmingly positive from the dental community. I think most of them really appreciate having, a dental-centric CPA like yourself and a guy that's just focused on dental practices. That's all that they do. They usually say, do you do other things? And I say, not really. I mean, if it falls on my lap, maybe, but for the, every day of every waking hour of every day is focused on dental. And it's just been so much fun. And there is a huge need for it because these dentists, right, they're trained in clinical excellence, right? That is what they love to do. And they may not be passionate about statements and accounts receivable and who does their claims processing and training their staff. Those are things that are usually secondary. So they usually really appreciate having someone that's passionate about those things, bringing that to the table so they can really focus on what they want to do best or what they want to do most.
Yeah, whenever I got started in this industry, we were like outsourced CFOs for dental practices, and I was always just so surprised about how hard people made the whole AR process, or how convoluted and how poorly it was ran. When I was in high school, I worked for one of those now extinct movie rental places. For working for renting movies, and man, we went on people that were late on their movie returns really, really hard, and the fees involved with that, trying to collect that money. And I was in high school, calling these, we literally every night had to call, 200 people to say, hey, excuse me, sir, your VHS of Crocodile Dundee is 4 days overdue. You do realize that you're racking up, giant late fees for that. When they came in, we try to, collect on that. So, it just was amazing to me that there's these practices out there that have these huge outstanding balances and they just don't ever go and get them.
Yeah. It blows me away. Like, just because you're a good person, right? You're focused on people's, now we're just talking that dental care is actually bridging the gap into healthcare, right? They're making all these important distinctions linking dental care to healthcare. So there's a huge increased responsibility on all of our dentists' plate that, hey, I could drop dead of a heart attack if I don't take my good care of my teeth, and it's been linked to cancer and all these other things. And so it is a huge responsibility. And for some reason, the dental field seems to be a little bit behind the field. They're definitely behind the medical, at least in my experience, and definitely behind most other parts of American business, right? Like you said, the VHS tape, right? They would get on you if you didn't return that, but suddenly you run up a bill for, a crown at $1,200 and no one's that worried about it. Patient's not that worried about it, neither is the practice. And it just seems like there's kind of an unhealthy balance between, what the patient owes and the priorities of the practice. And the practice owners sometimes feel guilty about pursuing this account, but what the ultimate ramifications are is if that dentist does not get paid, not only can they not pay their staff, they can't control costs for all their other patients, and literally they're not going to be able to help anybody because they're not going to be in business anymore. So there's that line of really, from like a societal standpoint, looking at this globally and looking at it's much bigger than just the transaction, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So let's start with this. So whenever you're looking at a practice initially, how can you tell if their accounts receivable is blown out of proportion?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, we can give you the textbook answer, right? Mm-hmm. It's usually a half a month to a month of production, mm-hmm. right? That is outstanding. But I look at it more from an understanding perspective, because there's multiple things I think that need to be taken into consideration. Number one, each practice is different, right? So you have practices in rural America and huge metropolitan areas, and I think that has a major role in your strategy. Also, each practice is different. A specialist who maybe do a one-time procedure is going to treat that transaction a lot different than maybe a general dentist or a pediatric dentist that really relies on that referral income and repeated dates of service. So those folks may actually hold on to more AR. I think, Jonathan, really what it boils down to more than anything is the practice owner's comfort with risk and their strategy for growing their practice. It always kind of bothers me a little bit. And sometimes practices really brag about it. Like, we just don't let anyone out the door unless they pay, right? Or they say, yeah, we're booked up 4 months in advance. So you'll have to wait. Well, if you're an emergency patient, you don't want to wait 4 months. So, sometimes it's not really something to brag about, right? You're not getting a relationship. You're not helping anybody there. So I think a lot of it depends on the practice owner. In the beginning, when you're doing with kind of de novo startups like what you're dealing with, I'm guessing a lot of your clients, they need to get paid very quickly, right? Because they have loans and real estate loans and student loans and equipment and all these things they need to pay for. The priorities might be different. When you get to more of an established practice, generally speaking, they become a little more lax on their policies, and they can kind of figure out who's good for it, who's not, and they may take some chances in carrying their own AR, which is not really a popular opinion, but I do think there's a place for doing that selectively. I mean, why give all your money to the finance companies? I mean, you get paid very quickly, and that's very safe, but it hurts your profit margin when you have to give a big chunk of that profit right away to another company. So I would say that, if you're worried about your accounts, if they're keeping you up at night, you're finding that you're frustrated, you're angry, maybe it's skewing your judgment or affecting your relationships, I'd say maybe that's time to start taking a look at it. Or if someone like yourself says, wow, we have way too many write-offs, like what's going on? Then those are signs that, maybe you should take a look at different ways that you can improve your AR. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so you're basically saying instead of looking at some type of quantitative KPI, look more at what your risk, what your tolerancy for how long your owed money is.
Yeah, and I think it's a combination approach, to be frank with you. I mean, it's absolutely, there's just no silver bullet on help. This is the time you need to look at help. I do see the trend, though, and I'll make the analogy to dentistry, that people do tend to wait too long.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure every dentist on this call has the neglector patient that they just, like, I have been telling this guy to floss for 20 years. And he still comes in and complains when he gets cavities and I'm pulling teeth because he's not following my recommendations. So sometimes you're kind of at the end of that spectrum. And I do see that a lot. I do see a lot of practices waiting way too long. And I've had dentists literally in tears, just like, if I only hired you 20 years ago, Andy, I would have been so much better off. I would have been able to pay off my practice. I would have been able to retire early. And then you're dealing with a 60 or 70-year-old practice owner that is looking at their AR, how much they've written off over 20 years, and it literally makes them sick.
Okay, well, let's start with if we've got, let's pretend like we have a patient in the chair right now, and they're about to walk out, and they're about to be presented their financial, their financial payment plan. Assuming that person doesn't pay whenever they walk out, then we have what's now considered accounts receivable. We have, if it's an insurance patient, we have the insurance portion, we have the patient portion.
Mm-hmm.
So what we see a lot of practices do is they'll send, hopefully they're sending a statement to the patient.
Right.
And at the same, they're doing some type of claim with the insurance. When the insurance comes back in with, assuming that we, estimated what the insurance was going to pay correctly,
Right.
we then have to go for the patient balance if that hasn't been paid yet. So there's two avenues there. There's insurance receivables and there's patient receivables.
Yep.
So as far as the insurance receivables portion, what are some common mistakes that people are making in that world?
Yeah, it's so basic, Jonathan. You would not believe this. I mean, first of all, you've got to learn how to file the insurance properly. I'm amazed at how many practices have not taken the time to learn how to file clean claims. get all the codes right, attach narratives, photographs, whatever needs to be done, because a lot of times it's done very quickly. And then what happens is the insurance company comes back and says, hey, you didn't follow our rules. Yeah, our protocol. Thank you. And then they have to respond. Well, then you have more patients coming in the door. And if the practice is growing, it becomes increasingly overwhelming very quickly, just on the insurance side of things. I've run into clients that say, hey, I want to do something with my patient AR. It's out of control. And then we start taking a look at the flow. And really, right, one directly affects the other. If insurance is not squared away correctly, then you're really too late in the ballgame addressing the patient AR because things weren't set up properly. So really, I think training your staff, making sure they really know how to file insurance and are doing that correctly. And really, your days in AR for insurance for dental should be, 30 to 60 days at max. A lot of my practices are reporting getting paid within a couple weeks, but you really shouldn't have a large trend of practices not paying. I mean, it's a fairly simple business in comparison to like medical insurance, for example. So filing the insurance, making sure it's done right. Some practices are not staffed properly, and it may even make sense to outsource that insurance filing, which I have plenty of clients doing just that. And there's some great services out there that will do it at a fraction of what it would cost to do that internally, to hire someone to do that. And they just do this behind the scenes, virtually overnight. All they do is file insurance and give you a really clean slate so that you can focus on maybe the patient side of things.
Makes sense.
So I get excited. I'm not sure if I even answered your question right, but we're going down that path.
Well, no, the common mistake is that the people don't know how to do it. I mean, that's got to be the number one issue. And then, I know a lot of consultants, that's literally the first thing that they'll pull is insurance claims over 60 days of, because they'll go in and they'll find, oh, we've got 10 open claims totaling, $50,000 that we've just never followed up on because Susie got too busy or didn't see the response or didn't know to keep up with this or, X, Y, Z, D, E, F, G at that point. Right. So, what I tell a lot of people is you've got to remember to have a check to go back in and look at those old insurance claims to make sure we're following up on them, because not only do those claims come back in as rejections that we've got to have some type of response to, they also just get lost sometimes, or we didn't push the button or something like that. There's just easy money just sitting out there that we've just never gone and collected from the insurance company, which typically messes up the patient balances, which messes up everything else. So let's switch over to the patient now. So we've got the patient sitting there. They've gone home, they've received their treatment, or are going to be coming back for follow-up or whatever it is. How do you typically tell practices to submit statements to patients? Is it once a year, once a month, once a day, once a week? What do you like to tell people to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like brushing your teeth. The rule of thumb is the more frequently, the better your outcome's going to be. So
once a year then for me, right?
Yeah, just once a year. And then just go to the dental clinic and they'll take care of you. Mm-hmm. But no, it's more frequently is better than less. So we've got, I think, two critical areas that we're talking about, Jonathan. Number one is knowledge base, right? Do you have the knowledge to do what needs to be done? And probably second, that's probably even more important than that, is do you have implementation, right? And that's where most dental consultants get brought in. It's not that they don't know what to do. It's just that they don't do it. So by actually implementing, like you said, a strategy, a feedback loop where you're filing claims and you're following up on those claims, and the same thing with the patient side. Have a policy in place. We're going to bill the patient at least every month. If you want a good tip, try billing your patient every 2 weeks. I mean, every dental practice or medical practice in America, your car payment, your house payment, your cell phone, that's all monthly, right? What do you think is going to happen if your dental practice bills you bi-weekly? Who's going to get paid first? Walmart or your balance? Just just doing little stuff like that can have a huge impact on your cash flow. Another thing is just measuring, and this is your area of expertise, but measuring what's going on. Just, it's called the Hawthorne effect, right? You know this. You measure something, and inevitably your outcomes are going to be improved because they know that you're watching. So same thing with insurance and patient AR. I mean, it's not good enough to just have your practice manager put your accounts receivable report on your desk where you get to it later, which never happens. Are you actually meeting and talking to them about that? So, and that would apply to insurance and patient pay. But billing more frequently, training your staff how to have the tough conversations with patients, that, it needs to be resolved, that you value the patient, but at the same point, you can't afford to be a free clinic. And really, what you do now, especially in a new practice, is going to determine your philosophy moving forward. So a lot of practices say, hey, I just need new patients. I'm just going to get it going. I'm going to take everyone in. I'm not going to worry. Well, that's a habit, and it takes a long time to get out of bad habits. So starting the right habits early on the expectation, a cultural expectation with your staff and your patients on when it's to be paid. And also, encourage people to work with the patient. I wouldn't demand everything up front. That's ideal. Mm-hmm. And maybe you can give a little patient a little discount just to gain some loyalty. That's a great way to do it. And my dentist did that on me the other day, and I loved it. I actually went to my car to get my checkbook, which had dust on it. I haven't used my checkbook for years, but they said, if you write me a check, we'll take 3% off your bill because there's no merchant fees. I was like, absolutely. Why wouldn't I do that? Mm-hmm. And now they've created loyalty. Why would I go anywhere else? I get a discount with him. I'm not going to any other dentist. So it's about, keeping the frequency up, watching what's going on, and having some type of consequences in place, some type of solution or protocol. And even if it's a bad protocol, it's still better than no protocol at all.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah. One of the mottos of our podcast now is to execute, track, and refine. And the reason is because is not, the first one makes us get off our butts and actually do something. The third one is where we go back in and, and continually improve. We have to, I believe every business has to have a philosophy of continual improvement. Because if you install, like you said, even if it's a bad one, if you install it and then you're tracking it, like you said, whenever you notice that results are suboptimal, you can then go back in and refine it, and then you execute again, and you start the whole process over again. And then whenever you're refining and when you're executing, you're working on your strategy of how you do it. One of the funniest conversations I can remember whenever we started as outsourced CFOs was we were talking to a practice owner, and they were talking about their billing statements, and they were doing it once a month, always once a month.
Right.
And it was really close to the middle of the month. And it was like the second Friday of every month is when they did it. And I can remember looking at the statements and saying, and here in Arkansas, if you send something out today and it's locally, they're going to get it the next day, even on, yep. So what happens is every administrative day was on a Friday. So guess when they did the billings? It was on Fridays.
Right.
And so you send out the bills on Friday, the people get them on Saturday. And so I can remember the conversation very distinctly. I said, so who is answering the phone to take their payment whenever they call in the next day?
Nobody.
Yeah, exactly. And so do you have an online ability to pay? Can they log in and pay online for you? No, we don't. Do you have a voucher in there that they can mail back to you? No, it's just a statement.
And so your patients have to track you down to pay you. Like, yes, that's your motivation strategy. Mm-hmm. Like you said, make it easy. Give them a link on your website so they don't have to be embarrassed by their past due balance. Maybe they make a good faith payment. Maybe they'll owe $1,000 and they just lost their job. But they'll get online and throw $50 on a debit card just to keep the dogs at bay so that you understand that, they're making good faith. And that's help keep that patient current until they get their next job. I don't know, but it's certainly good. You can't, it's undeniable. It's not going to work better than being closed on Fridays and then Saturday and Sunday. And then, oh, by the way, we're closed from lunch from 11 to 1. And, your patients are working and they have jobs too. Like they may not have time to call you when it's convenient for you. So you have to be patient focused.
Yeah. No, it's and I just remember the doctor just staring at me like with this blank look on his face, like I can't believe that we've always done that. And I asked him, I said, do you pay your bills on the weekend too? No, not usually. And so what happens is they have literally from the time they open their mail on Saturday all the way until Monday night whenever they get finished. And then guess what? They're working all week long, so they don't want to have to try and get the money there during the day. So it's it's a big hassle. So you touched on another point. So whenever we send those statements out, the ability to pay is something that's important. Having them be able to make that payment as easy as possible is obviously important. You mentioned being able to pay online. Is that something that is, and I'm surprised that a lot of the automated billing doesn't have some integrated function in that currently from the practice management softwares.
Right.
Do you find that increases frequency of payments or lowers days in AR?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing empirical that I can point and say, hey, I've done a case study. I can show an exponential increase. But bottom line is, I do know for a fact if you offer it, you're going to get more payments than if you don't. I can't quantify it, but it's all about accommodating the patient. It's not all about the practice as much as we'd all love that to be. The bottom line is it's about the patient, and it's just on your expectations. If you don't expect to get paid and you're just going to bill someone monthly and cross your fingers and hope that you're going to get paid, I think you're going to have some learning experiences there. So it's really about executing some type of strategy. Again, even if it's not a great strategy, it's still better than no strategy.
So as far as let's assume we've sent statements out 1 month.
Yep.
And we're going in to do our second set of statements or the month afterwards.
Yep.
There's a ton of practices. All they do is they hit the print button, all the statements print out, they put it in the mail, and then they get sent out. There's no other protocol in place at that point.
Yep.
For the patient that we're using as our example, they haven't paid yet.
Right.
So to me, or I'm going to ask you, I guess, is there something that in that second month of billing that we need to be noting in regards to that first patient versus whenever we just sent everyone else the first statement out?
Yeah. I mean, you want some type of escalation in your language so the patient understands that the second statement is much different than the first. And anytime you send something out like through your software, and I'm not bashing software because software technology is fantastic, but if you're just sending the patient a statement that looks like every single other statement that they could possibly get, and your 30-day statement works the same as your 90, again, you're basically working yourself out of it. So you want to make things look different. So sometimes that requires, can you customize your statements a little bit? Like you said, sometimes they actually print them out and send them. And I like that because you can actually write, if you have the time, your staff can write a little message, make it personal. Hey, we enjoyed seeing Johnny. Hope he wins the state soccer championship. By the way, please call me so we can work this out, because it is a family environment for most dental practices. So making it a little bit different than everybody else, I think, is key. So the more often you can reach them, the different look, you could change the size and color of your statements or your envelope. Maybe use a different color marker. You can use smiley faces. Just make it a little bit different just to get someone's attention, because let's face it, all Americans have bills, right? We all do. So the question is, which ones do you pay, right? The average patient in your practice is seeing, Jonathan, is talking on their iPhone in the lobby. Can we agree on that?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that they don't have the money. It's just that they're paying different people that are perceived to be more important. And so the real question is, do you want your practice to be one of those people?
So whenever you're going through that second month of statements and you personalize it, you try and use a little bit more emphasis of like, look, this isn't, this is our second time sending this out. We're trying to make sure that you understand that this is an important bill, needs to be paid. We expect payment by XYZ date. At what point do you tell people to incorporate a phone call to reach out to the patient to say, hey, I was just noticing that you're 45 days overdue from payment. We're just calling to see if we can't work something out, or see if we can if you'd be okay with this, just accepting payment over the phone.
Yeah, I mean, you want to do that as quickly as possible. You don't want to wait 90, 120 days to start that. So you can it depends on the practice's staffing. If they feel like they're overstaffed and they have people that can actually do that reliably, and it's the same thing, is we know what we need to do. The question is, are we going to implement it? Right? So if that can actually, if it's feasible, it's realistic that can be done, have your staff calling the patients absolutely as it escalates at 45, 60 days. Sure. You can also hire companies to do that for you, right? Because let's face it, I mean, you have new patients coming in the door. Do you really want your new patients to see you getting in a heated discussion, potentially a heated discussion with a patient about a balance it's owed? I mean, that's right. That's not the right expectation you want to give. So again, practice has to gauge what are their resources, do they have the time and energy and money to do it, and sometimes it does make sense to just give it to another company. And they have companies out there that, and I've partnered with them, that can actually call the patient as your practice. So you're basically outsourcing some of that work to somebody else, and your patient can focus on insurance or focus on giving that patient a great experience, or maybe they're focused on treatment planning, all the other things that maybe are arguably better revenue drivers for your practice, right? Is it a real benefit to have your staff call the same patient the fifth time in 6 months? Please pay our money. Please pay our money. I mean, how much more redundant can you get?
Yeah, and I think people do respond better to a phone call nowadays than they do a piece of mail, because most of us just throw our mail away when we get it, and so it's easy to lose that. But yeah, I definitely see the having the time during the day for, especially the smaller the staff, the harder that is. If you're a practice with 2 or 3 front office people and you're handling 40, 50 people coming in every day, that can be a burden to try and find time to call 10 people or 20 people that have gone from who've already sent one statement, let them know, hey, just so you know, we're about to be sending out a second statement for your balance from your visit that you had 45 days ago. It can be tough, but and I like thinking about the practice doing that, because at that point, people can forget for a month, easily forget for a month. I've forgotten about paying bills for a month plenty of times. And I think that that doesn't have as strong of a pushback, unless that patient may be starting to welch on their agreement to pay, of course. And so, so let's back to the example. We've now stopped. We're now to the second month, and we send out statements. We've maybe done a phone call or something like that. Personalized statement, and now we're getting into the dreaded 90 days portion, which is, as most people know, once you fall into that quagmire of being past 90 days, your percentile chances of receiving any type of remuneration for the services that you gave just plummets, absolutely plummets. What at that point, at 90 days, should or do you tell practices to start doing in order to hopefully get some of their money?
Yeah, I mean, the whole process, Jonathan, is to think about prevention. Same analogy in dentistry. You want to brush, floss, go to your hygiene appointments to stop pulling the tooth. And when you have accounts that aren't collected, and you do this, I'm sure you do tax returns and tax planning, you look at the write-offs for the year. And you say that's the problem, okay? That is equivalent to pulling teeth all day long. It's traumatic, it's costly, and it hurts. I mean, it really hurts. So you want to start having a set of consequences in much earlier while you can actually get that patient back in the chair. So you want to get paid, but you also want an opportunity, a recare opportunity, to get that patient in the chair. So usually if a patient hasn't paid in about 90 days, I would be looking for a diplomatic type of collection company that would reinforce your position, because as you noted, your chance of recovery has dropped significantly. And how many times are you willing to let the patient throw away your statements, as you termed it, before you actually do something? It's like children. You have children, right? If you don't tell your children, if you just say, hey, don't do that. And I've tried it with my daughters. It works horribly. Use like a deeper voice, and you can, hey, please don't do this because it'll hurt you. But as long as they're doing exactly what they want to be doing, and there's no consequence, they're going to continue to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be some type of negative consequence from the outside. I don't believe that practices should be doing too much as far as implementing negative consequences themselves. You're in kind of a clinical position, so it really doesn't make a lot of sense. You want someone from the outside to do some light touches to let the patient know that it has escalated. It's not beyond the point of no return, but it's really behooves them to get back to that practice and take care of it.
I can remember I had signed up for some type of a subscription service, and I'd canceled, and they'd accidentally put me in the non-payment category rather than the canceled category.
Mm-hmm.
I found that out later whenever I asked them why I received this letter. They'd sent me a letter saying that that we were going to be, so it was one of the days where you had to have like a year-long contract, and I told them, we figured out very short. I knew the owner, and he said, okay, well, if it doesn't work out for you, we'll just cancel the contract. And so that's the reason I got this letter in the mail, and it said, you said that we were going to be, you're going to be charged like $40 a month for 11 more months. We are going to be forced to report this to the IRS as non-paid receivables.
1099 you, huh?
Well, no, they didn't 1099 me. They just said they were forced to report it as non-collectible receivables. And I remember seeing that. I was just like, I've never seen one of these before. Like, I deal with the IRS all the time. What's going on here? And then I thought about it. I was like, okay. So because almost every taxpayer in small business is a cash-based person. What they were basically doing was just saying, hey, we're not going to turn you over to the IRS.
Right.
We're just going to not report your income to the IRS because you aren't going to pay it to us. And it was just a very, very, very simple turn of phrase that made me really think about, like, do I need to pay these guys? Because if I don't, they're going to turn me over to the IRS. And then I was like, wait a second. They can't turn me over to the IRS for not paying something. The IRS doesn't care if I didn't pay something to somebody. But they were using that, the general public's fear of the IRS.
Sure.
If I didn't have the intimate knowledge of how the IRS works and the tax code works, I'd actually be kind of afraid of that notice.
Oh, I would lose sleep for like 3 weeks if I got that.
Oh yeah, it was very interesting, the way that it was worded. Just speaking with you made me remember that, because you were saying nicely worded, and that one didn't seem to be nicely worded to me.
What happened though? Did you take care of it?
No, I didn't owe him anything, so I didn't pay him. And because like I said, I talked with the owner of the company, and
But if you owed it, would you have done something about it?
If I owed it, then yeah, no, because I pay the things that I owe. But if when I looked at it, it made me think about the people that didn't know about that, if that would fear them into paying if they did owe it. It probably would have. It would have had, it gotten quite a few people to say, yes, I will pay this. But going back to the line of thing we were in. So, okay, we're at the 90 days. We're not at the point of no return. So you're saying at that point, you suggest having practices remove themselves from that equation and have someone else call or talk to them or send a letter on their behalf, so that they have that outside influence of saying, hey, look, your credit score is going to be affected by this, or say, you're You had a medical transaction that occurred. This practice has turned it over to us now due to the fact that you've not paid after 90 days. Is that what you're saying you would do around that time frame?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need some type of licensed third party to reinforce your position, because if a patient has ignored you for a series of months, then chances are they're going to continue to ignore you. And frankly, they're waiting for this. They've been conditioned by every other vendor they owe in America. They know their car is going to get towed off after a certain period of time. Their cell phone is going to shut them off at a certain period of time. Their house is going to get foreclosed on after a certain period of time. But why in dental, just because you care about your patients and you're a good person and you want to help and you're in healthcare, does that all go out the window? Like, how is that fair to you? So yes, having a consequence is going to motivate, and it's all law of averages. When I asked you those questions, did you do anything? It wasn't to put you on spot. It's just to kind of prove that some will and some won't. And it's just a numbers game, plain and simple. A certain segment of the population is going to be very motivated by hearing from someone on the outside. If you're going to jail tomorrow, chances are you're probably not going to care that much.
Mm-hmm.
You've got much bigger problems on your plate. So it's about motivating the people that are motivatable, and then identifying those that are not. And then you can continue to escalate it as you kind of go through that vetting process and figure out, who can we retain and who really is at risk. Because they're going to go somewhere else, Jonathan. If they haven't been back in your practice in 6 months to a year, they're not coming back, at least in my experience.
So let me ask this. So whenever we're talking to the people, or we're trying to get this, get the money from the people after we've turned it over to someone else, one of the main, I'll probably get this question once every 3 or 4 months, is at what point do we write off unreceivable? At what point do we write off someone's balance?
Yeah, and that's where I always refer them right back to you. Okay, because I know that that's more of I typically consider that more of a tax question, right? When you would consider it written off. But I tell my practices mentally, you want to write things off much quicker than when they would actually write it off for you. A lot of companies can help you recover a very high percentage of these accounts if you use them early. So I wouldn't recommend writing off too early, because then you're writing off the balance. Then when the patient pays you, you've got to reinstate the balance in your software and do all this creative accounting and reapplying. So, usually year end, I think, is when most people consider write-offs. But again, I'm not a CPA or attorney, so I can't give legal advice. I would usually defer that off to you. But mentally, they should be writing accounts off much earlier than they think. And most people are like, I'm going to write this off a year or two down the road. And realistically, that account was written off much earlier than that from a collectability perspective.
And that's what I was referring to, is from a collectability standpoint. Write-offs from going into your receivables for probably 95% of dentists actually don't have a tax consequence. So as far as, so you're saying it's earlier than you think. What happens to the people that buy practices and they've got, 30 years of just collections that are just sitting, or AR that's just sitting in there that was never touched or written off or anything like that, to the point where we don't even know if it's really collectible or anything like that, if it was actually even a good balance to begin with? What do you tell people to do in those circumstances?
Yeah, I don't win any popularity typically contests on this answer, but I do have to be very straightforward with practices. And usually, if they've gotten a proper valuation, Jonathan, and they have the right experts in helping them to buy the practice, they typically know this when they're buying the practice. I really hope that they do. But most of if it's accounts receivable that's older, and I would say over a year old, the chances of recovery are extremely low, typically less than 10%. So I wouldn't be building that into when they're buying the practice. I wouldn't be relying on you have to be very careful when you're evaluating the practice that they're true numbers on an accounts receivable perspective. I wouldn't consider it, if they have 7,000 patient records, but 5,000 of them would be inactive. In other words, someone that hasn't been in the practice for a year or a year and a half. I wouldn't be relying on those numbers uh, to make that decision on purchase price. So, not that I'm an expert in this area, but you want to really look at current cash flow, and that's one of the things I do in my consultancy is help boost those numbers so that you do look very attractive to a buyer. Because the practice owner is so emotionally invested in their practice, it is almost impossible to emotionally distance yourself from the transaction. They think, well, I've known this patient for 20 years. Their kids have come to see me, and I see them at Walmart and at soccer practice. But the reality of it is if they're not paying you within the past year or two, they're really not a good pay. Not, I shouldn't say good patient, but from a cash perspective, they're not a current patient.
So let's say that we've got a practice that they bought a practice 5 years ago, and the office manager was the same one. She's the one who does all the billing, and we're 5 years in, and we ask what they are, and it's 5 times what monthly production is, and we start looking, and they've got $300,000 in over 90 days, and we look back, and just since the dawn of time, no, there's never been a write-off in the system. Not talking about valuing the practice, not talking about buying the practice, not talking about anything like that. What at that point does that office manager need to do in order to be able to get it cleaned up so we can actually see what the heck's going on? Yeah. You're saying after a year we have less than 10% chance of collecting anything. What happens to that? The little old lady that owes $80 from 6 years ago, which we have no idea where she lives, who she is, or if she actually even owed that $60, or if it was an issue with the billing in the first place. Do you just say if it's over than say older than 2 years, then just write everything off, or is it if it's over than 2 years old and say less than $100, then we write it off, or what is it that you would say to do?
It's interesting. I just wrote an article on this. I commonly get asked, well, Andy, what are the statute of limitations in my state? And so the states basically say you have so many typically years, and that usually slides anywhere from 2 to, I think, 10 years, depending on the state, on how long you can legally affect collection of a debt. In other words, you could take someone to court, for example. And the intent of the article was not to give the answer everyone wanted to hear was, can I pursue an account that's 4 years old? The question is, do you want to? Does it make sense? And all too often, the statute is completely irrelevant. So using your example, it's kind of a three-pronged approach. Anything over 2 to 3 years, write it off. You can find companies out there that will gladly take it. I think when you look at what you're going to recover and the PR, the negative PR that you're going to experience doing something like that and your rate of return, I think it's extremely negligible. The second prong of that would be stopping the bleeding. And I would say working those accounts typically that are a year or 2 years old, they need to be sent to somebody that can address them. And you will get a nominal rate of return. It will make you a little more positive about the scenario. But again, your rate of recovery is going to be very low. And then the third part of that approach, Jonathan, would be the prophy stage of your receivables is now you're going to do something proactive early in the process so that you never experience that situation again. So that's the most profitable. You'll have the highest percentage of patients reactivating and lowest leaving the practice, and you really have the ability to have the greatest impact. So those accounts under a year old are still very manageable for the most part, and you really need to have a strategy to address those.
Very cool. Well, I think we've done a pretty good picture of painting like the the receivables beginning to the receivables ending. Is there any other points that you want to cover that we haven't had a chance to cover yet?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple quick things I would suggest people look at. And my goal is to help reduce accounts receivable. Okay. And that pretty much, starts from kind of where the patient agrees to treatment or case acceptance, and then kind of flows to the end of the revenue cycle. And I would say looking at systems or products or things that you can do from when that patient accepts treatment and then looking into the future, on when an account gets, a year or 2 years old, anything you can do within that. So that means taking a look at a lot of things that you wouldn't think about, like who does your claims processing, right? Should you outsource your insurance, or is that something that you feel like can be done better in-house? Just by having an effective insurance strategy, that's going to reduce your patient AR immensely. If you're fighting with insurance companies for 90 days to find out the patient owes, well, guess what? You're in that 90-day bucket that you were just talking about. That's a pretty dark place to be. So looking at your insurance, is that effective? Your claims processing. I see a lot of dentists that just go with whatever claims processor is embedded with their software.
Mm-hmm.
You can shop around for that. And I've got resources for that if people want to take a look at that. Same thing with credit card processing. I mean, people generally just set it up and they kind of forget about it. But there are opportunities in those systems that will directly affect your patient AR. So looking at those systems, and then, of course, from a billing and follow-up perspective, having some type of system in place is key, because you're competing for those patients' dollars for everybody in your community. And it really boils down to is, do you want to get noticed, or do you want to get sent in the abyss? And by doing everything exactly the way you've been doing it, or the exact way that, your software, or, just sending out an e-reminder monthly, you're going to kind of get out of it what you put into it. So I just encourage people to think a little differently and take a look at those systems. And again, I'm very happy to help with that. If they see value in that, sometimes I can just go in and see something very glaringly that they've never thought about before.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on today. Is there any other parting pieces of information you want to give?
Yeah, I mean, any of your practices, I have a script for how to collect from a patient at checkout that's extremely effective. And so I would offer to any of your listeners that I'd be happy to provide that free of charge. I'm not here just to sell products or anything like that. I enjoy working with practices. I always learn something new. So if they'd like a copy of that script, they could contact me. Could I give my contact information? And
yeah, sure.
Feel free to do that if they want. I'm Andy Cleveland, and my cell phone number, they could call or text me anytime, is 864-517-2233. And I am a bit of a workaholic, Jonathan, so I enjoy getting the calls and the texts pretty much any time. I just have to cover that over with my wife, with lots of gifts later. Beside the point, they could also email me. They could reach me at arninja@andycleveland.com. So, if I can help, or they just want a different set of eyes, there's no charge. I'm happy to take a look and see where the opportunities are.
Very good. Well, Andy, thank you so much for being a friend of the podcast, as well as a friend of my company, Dentist Metrics. And again, thank you for coming on today, guys. I urge you to reach out and say thank you for Andy for coming on the show today and sharing all the information he has. It's been very interesting. I always like talking about specific numbers, and AR is definitely one of those. So thanks again, Andy.
And I want to thank you, Jonathan, for you're doing great work in the dental community. I've talked to some people that you've talked to, and they're very happy with you. And you're doing a great service to the field of dentistry by doing these podcasts, because you're not only educating dentists, but you're educating people that work in practices and consultants and other people. You're exposing us to things that we need to learn about, So I want to thank you for doing that. It's just been a great platform for me to continue my self-development. So thank you for all that you do.
Hey, pleasure's all mine. So thanks again. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks, Jonathan.
Bye.
Bye.
A special thanks to Andy for taking the time with us today and sharing his best practices for getting paid. I really enjoyed the conversation today. And if you enjoyed our conversation today, be sure to check out Andy's patient checkout script to increase conversions PDF. And be sure to implement some of his suggestions. It could really make a big difference in your practice. So to get that bonus, simply text practice to 33444. Again, that's practice to 33444, or visit startyourdentalpractice.com/bonus if you're outside of the US. You'll also receive updates on the latest episodes of Start Your Dental Practice, helpful tips for owning and running a practice, and promotional opportunities direct to your inbox. So that's it for today's episode, but that doesn't mean that the learning and implementation have to stop there. I've created a free report called The 15 Numbers That Will Make or Break Your Dental Practice. This report has been downloaded over 1,000 times by dental professionals. So if you want your free copy of this report that's going to outline what the most important numbers are in any dental practice, and it also includes how to look at your numbers, how to set goals, has a whole slew of really important information that is the culmination of all of my experience as a dental CPA, then just go to startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. That is startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. And so that's it for today, Ambitious Dentist. Again, I'm Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV. I'll see you next week with another world-class practice owner or consultant that will help you start your very own dental practice. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the Start Your Dental Practice community. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do me a favor and go to startyourdentalpractice.com/iTunes to leave your honest feedback and review on iTunes. It's going to help me create a better experience, a better show, a better podcast for you, the ambitious dentist. Your feedback really does help, regardless if you like the show today or not. If you didn't like the show, let me know, because it's going to help me create a better show and podcast for you. Lastly, if you know of anybody that would benefit from today's episode and today's content, today's guest, please feel free to share with them on social media or through email.